There's a strange thing that happens in every room you walk into. The moment you start talking, people stop trying to figure you out. Think about that for a second. Every word you speak gives someone a piece of you, not your money, not your time, something rarer than both. And most people are giving it away for free all day long without even noticing. Here's what nobody tells you: the people you admire most, the ones who seem to move through life with quiet command, the ones whose names carry weight when they enter a conversation, they didn't get there by saying more. They got there by saying less, and not in some mysterious, accidental way, on purpose, every single time. You know the feeling. You've watched someone in a meeting who barely speaks, and somehow when they finally do, the whole room leans in. You've seen the person who doesn't explain themselves, doesn't defend every decision, doesn't fill every silence, and somehow they're the one people trust the most. Meanwhile, you're over here explaining your weekend plans to a coworker who didn't even ask twice. If you've ever walked away from a conversation and thought, "Why did I just say that?" you already know what this feels like from the inside. You felt your own words slipping out before you decided they were worth saying. You've watched yourself over-explain a simple decision until it sounded like an apology. You felt the specific exhaustion of talking and somehow still not feeling heard. That's not a personality flaw, that's a leak. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So let's talk about where the leak is actually coming from. Picture a dam holding back a massive reservoir. The water behind that dam isn't powerful because it's loud, it's powerful because it's contained. The second you start poking holes in that wall, the water doesn't get stronger, it gets weaker, because now it's scattered, draining out in 100 directions instead of being released all at once, with force, at exactly the right moment. That's what your words are. That's what your energy is. That's what your presence is. Power isn't the absence of water. It's the containment of it. And almost everyone you've ever met who feels small in a room isn't actually small. They've just got 1,000 tiny holes in the wall, leaking out a little bit of themselves with every unnecessary sentence. This is the whole philosophy in one image. Contain it, and it moves mountains when you finally let it go. Leak it, and it just makes everything around it a little damp. Now let's get into exactly how this leak happens, and more importantly, how you seal it back up. Point 1. Every word is a withdrawal. You ever notice how the most respected person in the room is rarely the one who talks the most? Here's why that's not a coincidence. Words function like currency. Every time you speak, you're making a transaction. And just like money, if you hand it out constantly without thought to anyone for anything, it stops meaning anything. Imagine someone who tips $50 for a cup of coffee every single day to every single barista. At first, people are stunned. By the third week, they expect it. By the third month, $50 feels like nothing to them at all, because that's what you've trained them to expect. Your words work exactly the same way. Think about the person in your life who comments on everything. Every group chat, every meeting, every family dinner, they've got an opinion, and they share it instantly every time. You like them. They're not bad people, but somewhere along the way, you stopped really listening to what they said. Their voice became background noise, not because they're not smart, but because they spent their currency so often it lost its exchange rate. Now think of the opposite person, the one who stays quiet through most of the conversation and then says one sentence that changes the direction of the whole room. That sentence didn't have more truth in it than anything the talkative person said all night. It just had scarcity behind it. Scarcity is what makes currency valuable. It's not the content of the word, it's the rarity of it. Here's your actionable piece. Before your next sentence in a conversation that actually matters, a negotiation, a hard conversation, a meeting, ask yourself one question. Is this adding value, or am I just spending because the silence felt uncomfortable? That tiny pause, that 1-second gap, is the difference between a withdrawal and an investment. But here's the thing, knowing you're overspending and actually stopping yourself are two very different battles. Because most of the time, you're not talking too much because you're careless. You're talking too much because you're trying to manage how people see you. And that's a much deeper trap than it sounds. Point 2, silence protects the plan. You ever tell someone your big idea before you've even started it, and then somehow lose the motivation to actually finish it. That's not a coincidence either, and it's not laziness. There's something almost cruel about how this works. The moment you announce a plan out loud, your brain registers a small hit of satisfaction, almost like you already accomplished something. Researchers have talked about this for years, the gap between announcing an intention and actually following through on it. Talking about the goal can quietly trick your mind into feeling like the goal is already partially done. So the urgency to actually do the work quietly drains out of you, one conversation at a time. Think about the friend who announces they're starting a business at every dinner party for 2 years. Everyone nods, everyone says that's so exciting. And somehow, 2 years later, the business still hasn't launched, but the friend has gotten an awful lot of social credit for an idea that never left the napkin it was sketched on. Compare that to the person who says nothing for 18 months and then just quietly drops a finished product into the world. Nobody saw it coming. And that's exactly why it landed so hard. There's something else happening here too. When you announce a plan early, you invite an audience of critics before you've built any armor against criticism. Someone questions it. Someone offers unsolicited advice. Someone subtly doubts you, and now you're not just building your plan anymore, you're also managing everyone else's opinions about it. That's an exhausting tax to pay before you've even gotten started. So here's your actionable insight. The next time you have a goal that actually matters to you, try this experiment. Tell no one until it's either finished or undeniably in motion. Let it grow in private, the way a seed needs darkness before it needs sunlight. You'll notice something interesting happen to your own follow-through. But protecting your plans is only half of it, because even when you manage to stay quiet about your goals, there's another place where your words leak out without you even realizing it, and it's probably the hardest one to catch. Point 3. Clarity is the real cure for rambling. Have you ever walked out of a conversation and thought, why did that take 15 minutes to say what should have taken 30 seconds? Here's the secret almost nobody tells you. Rambling isn't a talking problem. It's a thinking problem wearing a talking costume. When your thoughts are foggy, your mouth tries to compensate by throwing out more words, hoping that somewhere in that pile of sentences, the point will eventually show up. It rarely does. It just buries the listener in noise while you're still searching for what you actually meant. Think of a contractor giving you a quote for kitchen renovation. One contractor walks in, talks for 20 minutes about materials, timelines, possible delays, his uncle's renovation horror story, and somehow still hasn't told you the price. Another contractor walks in, looks around for 5 minutes, and says, 18,000, 6 weeks, here's why. You trust the second person instantly, not because he talked less out of politeness, because his clarity made the talking unnecessary. He'd already done the thinking before he opened his mouth. This is the part that's actually freeing once you understand it. You don't need to try to talk less as some kind of willpower exercise. That's treating the symptom. What you actually need is to think more clearly before you speak, and the shorter, sharper sentences will follow almost automatically. Confusion needs more words to feel finished. Clarity needs fewer. Here's your actionable step. Before any conversation you know matters, take 15 seconds, just 15, and silently finish this sentence in your head. The one thing I actually need to say here is, if you can't finish that sentence quickly, that's your sign you're not ready to speak yet. You're still thinking out loud, and thinking out loud in front of other people rarely looks like wisdom. Now here's where it gets interesting, because clarity solves half the equation. But there's another skill almost nobody practices, and it might be even more powerful than speaking with precision. Point 4. Listening is where the real information lives. Here's an uncomfortable question. When was the last time you listened to someone without already preparing what you were going to say next? Most people don't actually listen in conversations. They wait. There's a difference. Waiting means your mind is already drafting your reply while the other person is still mid-sentence. You're not absorbing what they're saying, you're just waiting for your turn to talk again. And the moment you do that, you miss almost everything valuable that was actually being communicated. The tone, the hesitation, the thing they almost said but didn't. Picture two people negotiating a deal. One of them spends the whole conversation thinking about their next argument, their next point, their next clever rebuttal. The other one just listens, really listens, to what the first person is actually worried about underneath their words. By the end, the listener understands the entire situation. The talker only understands their own position. Guess who walks away with the better outcome almost every single time? It's not the one who talked the most. It's the one who understood the most. This is the part people miss about quiet, influential people. They're not just being silent for the sake of looking mysterious. They're collecting information the entire time everyone else is busy broadcasting. And information is what makes your next sentence, whenever you finally say it, land exactly where it needs to. Your actionable insight here is simple, but it'll change how people respond to you almost immediately. In your next real conversation, try going twice as long as feels comfortable before you respond. Just sit in it. Let the silence stretch a little longer than your instincts want it to. You'll be amazed at what people say into that gap, simply because you didn't rush to fill it for them. But listening well, thinking clearly, protecting your plans, none of it matters if you can't handle the moment when everything in you wants to explain yourself. And that moment is coming for everyone, sooner or later. Point 5. Explaining yourself too much makes you look smaller, not bigger. Ever notice how the moment you feel criticized, your first instinct is to explain everything immediately in detail? That instinct feels like strength in the moment. It's actually the opposite. Real conviction doesn't need backup. When you trust what you said, you say it once and you let it sit there. The need to immediately add 3 more sentences of justification is usually a sign that some part of you isn't fully convinced either, so you're trying to convince yourself just as much as the other person. Think about a leader announcing a hard decision to their team. One version of that leader explains the decision, then re-explains it, then adds a disclaimer, then softens it again because someone's face looked uncertain. By the end, the team isn't more reassured, they're more confused, and now they sense the leader isn't even sure about it either. Another version of that same leader says the decision once, clearly, and then simply moves the meeting forward. That second leader didn't have a better decision. They just had more discipline in how they delivered it. And people followed the second leader almost every single time because certainty is contagious and so is doubt. This is genuinely hard to practice because over-explaining feels like care. It feels responsible. But there's a version of care that actually respects people more, trusting that they're capable of sitting with an idea without you holding their hand through every possible objection in advance. Here's your actionable move. The next time you make a statement you believe in, say it once clearly, and then physically stop yourself from adding the follow-up sentence that starts with "I just mean," or "what I'm trying to say is." Let the first sentence be the whole sentence. It will feel uncomfortable the first few times. That discomfort is the old habit losing its grip. And once you start doing that, something even bigger starts to shift, because the way you speak is never really separate from the way you live. Point 6. How you speak is how you operate. Here's something worth sitting with. The way you talk under pressure is basically a preview of how you'll act under pressure. If your words come out scattered, reactive, and impulsive, that's not just a speech pattern, that's a window into how your decisions get made too. The same self-control that lets you pause before a reckless sentence is the exact same muscle that lets you pause before a reckless decision. They're not two different skills. They're the same skill, just showing up in two different places. Think of someone who reacts to every minor inconvenience out loud, immediately: a delayed flight, a rude comment, an unexpected bill. They process everything externally in real time, which means everyone around them gets to witness every unfiltered reaction they have. Now think of someone who feels that exact same frustration but holds it for a beat, lets it pass through them, and responds 3 seconds later with something measured. The frustration was identical. The outcome was completely different. That 3-second gap is where self-respect actually lives. This is the quiet truth most people never connect. Discipline isn't something you only practice at the gym or with your finances. It's something you practice every time you choose your next sentence. A person who can't control their mouth in a tense moment will struggle to control their choices in a tense moment because it's the exact same internal muscle being asked to fire. Your actionable insight is this: treat your words today the way you'd treat your actions. Before you speak in a heated moment, ask the same question you'd ask before a big decision: will I respect this in an hour? If the answer is uncertain, that's your cue to wait, just a little. The sentence will still be there in 3 seconds. It's not going anywhere. Now here's where this all comes together, because there's one more piece, and it's the one that determines whether anyone actually notices any of this in the first place. Point 7. Timing decides everything. You could say the exact right thing and still watch it completely fail, simply because you said it 5 minutes too early. This is the part that frustrates people because it feels unfair. You did the work. You found the clarity. You waited, you listened, you held back the urge to over-explain, and then you said the right words at the wrong moment and it just didn't land. Here's why that happens. People aren't only responding to your words. They're responding to the entire context around those words, their mood, the room, what just happened 30 seconds before you spoke. If that context isn't ready to receive your message, no amount of being technically correct will save it. Think about giving someone feedback the second they walk through the door after a brutal day at work. Even if your feedback is fair, even if it's something they genuinely need to hear, the timing turns it into an attack instead of a gift. Now picture giving that exact same feedback an hour later after they've had dinner and decompressed. Same words, same point, completely different reception. The message didn't change, the moment did. This is why the most respected communicators aren't just thinking about what to say. They're constantly reading the room for when to say it. That's not manipulation, that's respect. It's recognizing that a message is a gift, and gifts land differently depending on when you hand them over. Here's your actionable step. Before delivering anything important, feedback, a hard truth, an idea you're excited about, pause and ask one question. Is this person, this room, this moment actually ready to receive this right now? If the honest answer is no, hold it. Not forever, just until the moment catches up to your message. So here's where all 7 of these pieces actually meet. Every withdrawal you stop yourself from making, every plan you protect by staying quiet about it, every cloudy thought you clarify before it leaves your mouth, every moment you choose to listen instead of rehearse your reply, every urge to over-explain that you let pass, every reactive sentence you replace with 3 seconds of self-control, every perfectly timed pause before you finally speak. None of these are separate skills. They're the same skill, practiced in 7 different rooms of your life. And here's the part that should genuinely excite you. This isn't about becoming colder or more distant or some version of yourself that withholds love and warmth and connection from the people who matter to you. That's not what any of this is. This is about becoming someone whose warmth actually means something when you give it, because you're not handing it out carelessly to everyone, all the time, without thought. This is about becoming someone whose yes carries real weight because you didn't say yes to everything. Someone whose praise actually lands because you didn't praise everything. Someone whose presence in a room shifts the energy, not because you demanded attention, but because you never needed it in the first place. You already have everything required to start this today. You don't need permission. You don't need a special moment. You don't need to wait until you feel more confident, because confidence isn't actually the prerequisite here, practice is. The very first time you pause before a sentence you don't need to say, you're already doing it. The very first time you let someone finish their thought without jumping in, you're already doing it. The very first time you let your results speak instead of your explanation, you're already doing it. This isn't about saying less because you have less to offer. It's the opposite. It's about saying less because what you have to offer finally deserves to be heard clearly, without static, without dilution, without getting lost in 100 unnecessary sentences surrounding it. So here's the one thing to actually do today, right now, before you even finish watching this. The next time you feel the urge to explain, defend, or fill a silence just for one conversation, let it pass. Don't force it. Just notice it and let 3 seconds go by before you decide what to do with it. That's the entire practice. 3 seconds. That's where this whole transformation actually begins. Because in the end, the people who moved the world quietly understood something the rest of us are still learning. It was never about how much you say. It was always about what you have left unsaid and what you finally build with it instead.